Yes, good morning everyone, and welcome to this webinar organized by the Nordic Bioplastic Organization. My name is Wallteg. I am the founder of the organization and also the editor-in-chief of a magazine called Pack News, earlier known as Nord Emballage. And this magazine covers everything from the packaging industry, for example, bioplastics as a packaging material. And actually, we were very early with picking up the possibilities with biomaterials. In 2007, we organized the first conference in Sweden about bioplastics in packaging. And at that time, the consumption of bioplastics in Europe was 63,000 tons. A lot has happened since then. But in 2012, we were asked by the industry if we could set up an organization for them, and that was the starting point for the Nordic Bioplastic Organization. We are a quite lively organization, and as far as I know, we are one of the biggest national bioplastics organizations in Europe. And today we have around 60 member companies, and of course we'd like to have more, so please feel free to register for a membership. We need you. Every second month we try to have a webinar on different topics, normally with more than one speaker, but today we only have one speaker, and that is Ms. Silvia Forni from the Environmental Department of the European Commission. Silvia Forni is an Italian national and graduated from diplomacy from the University of Trieste in Italy, with a master in European studies from the University of Brussels. She is a European official with over 15 years experience in the field of the European internal market. And she is currently working at the Environmental Department of the European Commission as a policy officer, the Directorate for Circular Economy. Previously, she has worked as a parliamentary assistant at the European Parliament and as a policy officer, first at the Secretariat General of the European Commission, then at its Transport Department. And today she is going to talk about, she's given some bullet points, for example, why a policy framework of bioplastics is necessary, and compostable plastics also, and what evidence do they collect have they collected for their decisions. She will talk about opportunities and challenges for bioplastics and also about the next steps for this material. And before I give the word to Silvia Forni, I would like to say that the presentation will be possible to download from the webpage of the Nordic Bioplastic Organization in a couple of days. And if you have any questions during the presentation, use the chat, and we will see how many questions we have time to pick up and put to Silvia Forni. So, as I usually say, you're not attending to listen to me. You're going to listen to Silvia Forni. And Silvia, the screen, not the scene, is yours. So welcome.
Thank you, Bo. Thank you, everyone, and good morning, everyone. I'm glad. Can you hear me? Is it okay? Audio and video?
Everything is okay.
Good. So I'm glad to have found the time with Bo for this presentation. Was initially scheduled before the summer, but then due to engagements at that time, we had to postpone to end of August. So I have prepared a presentation to introduce the subject of bioplastics. Next slide, please. So this is the political context for the policy framework on bio-based, biodegradable and compostable plastics adopted by the European Commission last year, end of last year. It was the 30th of November. It's a non-binding communication, so it's not a legislative work, but it gives the position of the Commission as to these plastics. This is a political context I'm sure you are pretty familiar with, the European Green Deal, the Circular Economy Action Plan, and of course the European Strategy for Plastics in a Circular Economy adopted in 2018, which is still guiding us in order to improve the economics and quality of recycling and curbing plastic waste and littering. So this is still valid, and in all of these documents you find references to the need for a policy framework to cover these plastics. Next slide, please. But also mentioned the need for, so we also thought it was important and necessary to come with some framework for these plastics. Why? Because they are perceived as good or even better for the environment by the public in Europe and at international level. We have contacts with countries, third countries, and we know that these plastics are being promoted even actively in some cases. So today it is a niche market, 1% of total production capacity, but it's growing. It's growing faster than in previous years, and the share could double in 2025 if the plans are respected, if the projections are respected. It's mainly used for applications like packaging, almost half of the demand, but you can find these plastics, bio-based, biodegradable and compostable plastics in other consumer goods, in textiles, in sectors like transport, automotive in particular, but also construction and agriculture. We wanted to have a look at these plastics to have a better common understanding of these plastics and to see where these plastics can be beneficial. We came to some conclusions. I told you this is not a legislative work, but it gives you the position of the Commission as a whole as to these plastics. We are against the generic claims concerning these plastics. First, the conclusion, because we think that if the claim is generic, is not specific, it leads to confusion. An example is bioplastics for products, of course, not for associations, but for products, we think it is generic, it is not accurate, it doesn't say anything about the sustainability of these plastics, so we prefer not to use bioplastics, and we invite the community not to use bioplastics as a generic claim. Second conclusion is that priority should be given to reduce consumption, reuse, and recycle. This is the political context I introduced earlier, the European Green Deal, the European Circular Economy Action Plan, and the European Plastics Strategy. We don't want to perpetuate a single-use models, and we want to look at genuinely sustainable alternatives to current dominant plastics that are fossil-based and non-biodegradable. Next slides, please. This slide gives you an idea of the evidence that was collected over 2 years of work. The work is the fruit of a cooperation between some departments of the Commission. I'm sure you're familiar with DG Environment, of course, I work for, but also DG RTD, GRC, Joint Research Center, DG Sante, DG Mare. So many colleagues contributed to this work. And as you can see, we have already carried out a number of studies, and we have also carried out an open public consultation with quite good responses collected. So we treated these plastics at first in a separate way. So we look at the bio-based plastics with the 2 studies, looking at the biomass content and the sourcing, and the GRC also came with a study I'm sure you're familiar with, the plastic LCA method. Then we looked at biodegradable plastics with the help of the European Commission Chief Scientific Advisors. This is a group of very high-level experts that assisted us in understanding better biodegradable plastics. They came with an opinion on the matter, with also some recommendations for the Commission we try to follow. Some of the recommendations, you see them here. Biodegradability is in no case a license to litter. And then the question that we asked the chief scientific advisors, it was for which applications does it make sense to use these plastics? This question was also asked in the framework of the study on compostable plastics. Again, we asked ourselves and we asked our experts for which applications does it make sense to have these plastics. These plastics have been founded over the years at European level. Many of you may have been part of some projects. But the first question we wanted to ask ourselves and our experts was where? So for which applications does it make sense from an environmental point of view? You also see a study on agri-plastics. We wanted to have a closer look to these plastics used in agriculture, so both conventional, fossil-based and non-biodegradable, and bio-based and biodegradable. All these studies have been finalized and were published in the course of the last 2 years, and you can find them on the website of the European Commission and of DG Environment. Next slide, please. Now, on bio-based plastics, you will find in the Commission more or less always the same structure. So first of all, we try to look at the opportunities of these plastics, and then we try to look at the challenges that these plastics pose. We think in general that some conditions have to be met in order for these plastics to be beneficial and to provide environmental benefits. In the case of bio-based plastics, they can help us reduce our dependency on fossil resources. First of all, they can help us meet our climate neutrality targets, and they can also help us create jobs via local bioeconomies. They also pose challenges in our view. First of all, from a biomass content point of view, we think it is important that this content is always specified. Otherwise, it would be a generic claim, not a specific one. And as I told you earlier, we are against generic claims when it comes to these plastics. Second conclusion is that producers, manufacturers should give priority to secondary versus primary biomass. We think that this is an important conclusion. We will talk later about possible next steps, but this is for sure something that we attach a lot of importance to, and you also find this in the taxonomy framework as an important point to be taken into consideration. And then, of course, the issue of the sustainability criteria. We worked with experts on this, and we came to the conclusion that we have already in place some sustainability criteria, the ones of the bioenergy framework. We think that these sustainability criteria can be used for bioplastics when it comes to land use and biodiversity. When it comes to emissions, we think that the bioenergy framework cannot be used directly as such, because we're not talking about the same materials. These plastics are not intended to generate energy. And for us, it is important to continue to look at these plastics and to continue to look at emissions from these plastics in a comparison with the conventional plastics. I'm sure you're familiar with the concept of biogenic carbon. This was extensively discussed internally and with experts, and we came to the conclusion that for the time being, only bio-based plastics that have long lifetime and that are not incinerated at the end of their life, these plastics can have beneficial carbon storage effects, but this is an issue for further discussion. I see that you are active in the chat, but I will continue now, and then we will take questions from the chat with pleasure. So this is for bio-based plastics. So you see that there is a room for further work, further research. The one on biogenic carbon is being now carried out at different levels, United Nations, but also within the environmental footprint method. But this is ongoing, and this is not to deliver a result immediately. It will take some more time. Next slide, please. Concerning biodegradable plastics, I told you that we asked the opinion of the chief scientific advisors, and they came with recommendations, very clear recommendations to the European Commission. I invite you to read this text and to read the recommendations that are contained in this text. We think in general that they can help us reduce the plastic accumulation in the environment, be it soil or water, but they also pose challenges. You know, the concept is a complex one. I'm sure you're more than me experts in this field, so you know perfectly that time frame and specific and receiving environment are important concepts when it comes to biodegradable plastics. The public is not aware of, in many cases, of these concepts that are indeed important for biodegradation. Time frame, what is a time frame that allows for no harm to the environment, and what is the specific and receiving environment these plastics are intended for. Then the answer to the question that I mentioned earlier, for which application does it make sense to have these plastics? Concerning biodegradable plastics, we think that there are specific applications where these plastics can be beneficial. In general, we think that these plastics, that first of all, there should be consumption reduction, and then reuse, and then recycling. But when the full removal, the full collection, and the full recycling of these plastics are not possible, not feasible, we think that there are specific applications, like for instance, agricultural mulch films, where these plastics could be used in a beneficial manner. Of course, these mulch films should be certified according to appropriate standards. The main recommendation of the chief scientific advisor was that these plastics should not be considered in any case as a license to litter, not a solution to inappropriate waste management or littering. So we think it is important not to have claims on biodegradation for litter-prone products. And here you have examples of litter-prone products within the Single-Use Plastics Directive, that indeed is targeting litter-prone products, and there are measures there for these products. Next slide, please. When it comes to compostable plastics, they can help us again reduce the plastic accumulation in the environment, in the compost, then is used in many cases on the soil, and they can help us increase capture of biowaste. I'm sure you're pretty familiar with this obligation that as of end of this year, biowaste must be collected separately everywhere in the European Union. But they also pose challenges. We think, first of all, that we should only talk about industrially compostable plastics. You don't see in the slide, but there is a last sentence in red that says that the home composting is very challenging, and it looks more like an open environment than industrial composting facilities. So we think it is important that these plastics are collected via the collection of the biowaste, and that they go to industrial compostable plastics facilities where the infrastructure is in place. So the infrastructure has to be in place in order to have these plastics on the market. The route must be specified via, for instance, pictograms. And again, the answer to the question, where does it make sense to have these plastics? We found that it makes sense to have these plastics only in specific applications. I give you the example of the bio-waste bags used in many countries, like for instance Italy and Spain, but it's becoming common even beyond those countries to have these plastics to collect the bio-waste. And indeed, The experience shows in countries like Italy or Spain that the use of these plastics helps reduce plastic accumulation in the compost and increase capture of bio-waste. Next slide, please. So we plan to continue to found these plastics, the research of on these plastics, but we wanted to highlight areas for further research work. And indeed, we think that the research as of now should focus on, for instance, greenhouse gas emissions of bio-based plastics compared to conventional plastics, because as I told you, we think it's not that you can easily have claims on emissions from these plastics compared to conventional plastics. It's a complex issue, so it needs more research at the level of the experts. Concerning biodegradable and recyclable plastics, we think it is indeed an area where more research work is needed to find where it would be important, it would be beneficial to have plastics that are at the same time biodegradable and also recyclable via material recycling processes. Concerning the biodegradation process in itself, as I told you, the time frame, as we are told by the experts, the time frame is an important issue, but the transfer from one environment to the other is also another issue that is that it deserves more attention. For instance, for mulch films, what happens if the mulch film is carried out from soil to water because, for instance, of heavy rains or because of wind, and we know what now is the weather in Europe. So we think it is important to know what are the implications if this transfer actually occurs. And then, of course, the long-term effects of the use of these plastics on agricultural soil. There are projects in place, maybe you're familiar with. There are projects looking at the transfer, looking at the long-term effects, and this is being carried out. So I think it's worth waiting for the results of these studies. And then we want to have a closer look at the claims that are done. If there is a link between the claim and the attitude to litter by the public, the experience is not conclusive. The experience shows that there might be a link, but we want to have evidence of. We have not been able to collect evidence on this, but we think it is worth deserving more attention to this. And then, of course, at international level, we will use this communication to spread the position of the Commission at international level during the negotiations of the Global Plastics Treaty. My colleagues are negotiating right now, so we think it is important to have a dialogue with the third countries that are promoting these plastics. We want to understand better where they are promoting these plastics and with which kind of benefits. I wanted to end with indeed some words on the possible next steps. This was mentioned by both. So let's see. I haven't prepared a slide for this, but because in reality the Commission communication doesn't contain a list of, it's not an action plan, as sometimes it is the case. It is not an action plan, so you don't find follow-up actions in the communication, but we are now collecting feedback from experts concerning the conclusions in the communication, the orientations, some criticism as well. We have collected. We want to continue to collect this feedback, and we want to take the time to reflect on the feedback collected in order to see if there is a follow-up action that is needed concerning, for instance, bio-based plastics. We see that there is a momentum for these plastics in the market. there are projections that are given. We always take these projections with some prudent approach, but it's true that this is something the community is looking more and more, even I mean the whole plastic community, meaning also the producers of conventional plastics are now considering producing bio-based plastics. So this is for sure something we want to look at even more closely. I mentioned the biogenic carbon issue, which is one of the issues that we want to explore further. But this is what I can tell you now, because we are also towards the end of this first European Green Deal deliverables, series of deliverables. So it will be for probably the next commission to decide what to do with these plastics. So let's see what is needed and what is possible in terms of, for instance, a sustainable criteria for these plastics. I will stop here, and I'm glad to take all questions that you might have. We have some more minutes, so I'm available for.
Okay, thank you very much, Silvia. Excellent. I think you can see the questions in the chat, can't you? So I think better that you read them yourself and pick up those you see that you have a good answer to, and instead of me reading them, we will save some time that way.
Yeah.
So pick and choose.
So starting from the beginning, generic claims, I made examples of bioplastics is already a generic claim for us. You have other nature-based, green-based plastics, etc. So this is also treated in the Empowering Consumers Directive. So it's a common position in the Commission to think that these claims should be avoided, not for associations, as I told you, but for products. We think it is important to have many different claims. The imagination has no limits in this field of claims. So you know that we have also adopted a proposal on greenwashing. So I think that this is a field where we can all make efforts in order to bring clarity to the benefit of the consumers. And then, a conflict of interest between biodegradable plastics versus recycled plastics. Of course, biodegradation means that you have to resource them. So that is why we think it is important to go through the main recommendation of the political context I mentioned you earlier. So first of all, consumption reduction, then reuse, and then recycle. And recycle means material recycling via mechanical recycling, or even now chemical recycling, which is now attracting a lot of attention and a lot of investments within the plastic community, chemical recycling. So everything that needs to be resourced for us is something that has to be considered under certain conditions. Certification scheme for function of compost machines. I'm not sure I understand fully your question, but certification, you have certification schemes for these plastics. These are industry standards mainly. So we promote the use of these standards, these horizontal standards, but it remains that they are mainly market industry standards, and that they are voluntary. We have in some cases EN standards. I mentioned you mulch films. There we have a standard. That is why we choose this application as a possible beneficial application for biodegradable plastics, because there is a standard. Without standard, We think it is very much risky and it needs to be standardized. So you have standard also for packaging, and there we also have examples of possible beneficial applications. In terms of other possible agricultural applications that could be beneficial, possibly beneficial in terms of biodegradable plastics, we think it is important to have standards in place. In terms of method, we are not so prescriptive in the communication, which is not binding. Again, it's not legislative, but we consider mass balance approach, and we do not close the door to mass balance approach. It is used when it comes to recycling, and the Commission is now busy with coming with some criteria for it. So it's in the communication, and it's not that we consider this as a no-go area. Of course, we prefer when there is a full transparency. This is obvious. Great potential of compostable plastics. You make the example of bottles. It's not an example for us. It's not a possible beneficial application. It's not. If you look at the examples that we have in the communication, it's a very short list. I know we have been criticized for that, but now this work is in the hands of the co-legislators that are negotiating the proposal for a regulation on packaging and packaging waste. There is a part on compostable plastics. We worked on with our colleagues responsible for this file. We came to the conclusion that it's beneficial only for some very specific applications. So you know what I'm talking about. I'm talking about bags for the bio waste, separate collection, bags for very light plastic bags for fruit and vegetables, fruit and vegetable stickers, tea and coffee bags. These are the examples that we considered as beneficial. All other packaging should go through material recycling. The price is a barrier. We know perfectly that the price is a barrier for the uptake of these plastics. We are told that the lack of a real regulatory framework is also a barrier for the uptake of these plastics. We came with some orientations. It's not what you would call a regulatory framework because it's not legislative, but as I told you, we are reflecting now on possible, if any, follow-up action at regulatory level. There is a European standard on bio-based plastics. This standard in turn refers to the horizontal standards on bio-based products developed by SEN, absolutely. These standards cover topics such as, and communication, etc. We know and we invite the community to use these standards. Again, a PHA, sorry. And then because I see that there are many, is there any on for intentionally added microplastics in various products? There is a through a time frame on compostability.
Silvia, it's all up to you when you don't have any more time. So
yeah,
just let me know.
Additives. When do you think it's possible that Sweden will encourage more composting facilities to build up? So please bear in mind that this is also for subsidiarity. So we will not say to Sweden, please, there is an obligation for bio-waste, for instance, obligation of a collection, of separate collection as of the end of this year. This is for sure. And we think that to increase the bio-waste capture, it should be possible for everyone to do the collection with the compostable, industrially compostable plastic bags. used, intended for the collection of these bio-waste. This is the obligation, and this is the recommendation, and let's see what comes out from the revision of the packaging and packaging waste directive, which will become a regulation. So I invite you to follow that process, that legislative process, that will tell you more on which applications, because there we mandate the use of compostable plastics. We were not in favor of coexisting scenarios where you have both for the same application. We think that this may lead to leads to confusion. So there we mandate. So let's see what is the outcome of this revision. I think that would be all from my side. I thank you very much for your interest and for your questions. Please continue to follow us.
Thank you very much, Silvia. It was very interesting and informal and good information. Just a quick question. I know that you're also doing some work on microplastics, aren't you?
Yeah.
And what can you say just in a few words about that work? And when do you think that something can leak out? Not microplastics, but some information can leak out. What do you say about that?
Yeah, so very briefly, we have two strands of work, the intentionally added microplastics and the unintentionally released microplastics. So two different strands. The first one is the more advanced. Indeed, it's everywhere in the press every day, so it will come soon. Via a restriction, a new wide restriction for specific products like cosmetics, etc. And then the strand on the unintentionally released, it's in my unit that is being looked at, and we are proceeding source by source. We looked at many sources. It was a very huge work. Many experts involved, many stakeholders taking part. So very huge work, I have to say, very. And now we are proceeding source by source for tires, for textiles, for pellets. Pellets is the third largest source of microplastic pollution in Europe. So we now are very much focusing on plastic pellets. I cannot tell you when exactly, but if there is still some possibility, it would be for very soon. If we see that it's still possible, because as I told you, we are approaching the end of approaching the start of the end of this mandate. So, but let's see and let's cross the fingers. We have worked a lot on all these sources, and in particular on plastic pellets. So the losses from the installations that are perfectly avoidable for us.
Okay, so what you actually say is that in a short while it will be possible to do this again, but then we will talk about microplastics.
Yeah, absolutely.
Perfect.
Another occasion. Yeah.
Thank you. We're looking forward to that, and have a good time and continue
you too,
your work.
And you with your work as well.
See you later.
Thank you.
And
Bye.
to all of you who has been listening, thank you very much for participating. I hope you get some valuable information from this. And as I said before, I think this is being recorded and we will put it on our website in a couple of days, maybe the end of next week. It will take some time to do that, but it will be there so you can listen to it again. And I also would like to take the opportunity to say, first of all, become a member, please. We need to grow. We need to be bigger. To be able to be real effective with everything we like to do. And secondly, if you have some information or something you'd like to know more about when it comes to bioplastics, give us a hint about that. Maybe that could be a good idea for a new webinar. So just get in contact and we will listen to you. And I think sometime in November, we will be back with a new webinar. So we will keep you updated. Thank you very much and bye-bye.